I'll plant the evidence in his car. He goes to prison, we get the house. Those were the words Doris laughed into her phone, a smug smile playing on her lips, her bright yellow blazer standing out against the cold glass of their high-rise apartment. She spoke with the casual confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. What she didn't know was that her husband, Robin, had just walked into the room behind her. He stood frozen in the doorway, close enough to hear the betrayal that was meant to end his life. And in that terrifying split second, the oblivious corporate worker, Doris, thought she was framing, vanished. In his place stood the forensic investigator she never bothered to understand. Because Robin wasn't the victim she planned for. He was the only witness she forgot to account for. Before we find out how Robin turns the trap back on her, please hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories of justice served. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Are you in Chicago, London, Sydney, or Manila? I'm always curious to see where our global community is tuning in from. Robin stood frozen in the doorway, the air in the penthouse suddenly too thin to breathe. The words hung in the silence between them, vibrating with a malice that turned his blood to ice. He goes to prison, we get the house. Doris was still facing the window, her reflection ghosting against the skyline of the city, that bright yellow blazer serving as a beacon of her fabricated cheer. She laughed into her phone, a sound he used to find infectious, but now recognized as the rattle of a predator. He didn't scream. He didn't storm into the room and demand an explanation. Years of training, buried under a decade of suburban domesticity, kicked in with the precision of a circuit breaker. Robin stepped backward, his movements silent and controlled. He retreated into the hallway, counting to 3 to steady his heart rate, and then walked back toward the living room, this time letting his heels strike the hardwood floor with a deliberate, heavy rhythm. Inside the room, the change was instantaneous. Doris spun around, the phone vanishing into her pocket with a sleight of hand that would have fooled anyone else. The cruel sneer was replaced instantly by a beaming, affectionate smile. "Robin, you're home early," she chirped, walking over to kiss his cheek. Her perfume was overwhelming, a floral mask trying to cover the scent of betrayal. "I was just talking to the caterer for the charity gala." "The caterer," Robin repeated, his voice steady, devoid of the tremor ripping through his insides. "Sounds intense. I thought I heard you talking about prisons." Doris didn't flinch, though her pupils dilated just a fraction, a physiological tell she couldn't control. "Oh, don't be silly. I was telling her about that documentary we watched last night, the one about the wrongful convictions. It's just tragic." She patted his chest, dismissing him, dismissing his intelligence. To Doris, Robin was exactly what he appeared to be on paper, a boring, reliable logistics manager for a mid-sized shipping firm, a man who worried about supply chains and warehouse zoning, a man whose greatest thrill was a properly organized spreadsheet. She saw him as soft, a creature of comfort who had gotten lucky in the stock market and let her spend the dividends. She had no idea she was sleeping next to a ghost. Robin excused himself, citing a headache, and retreated to his home office. He locked the door, a heavy, soundproofed oak slab, and slumped into his leather chair. He stared at the blank monitors on his desk. Doris thought he was a logistics manager, and technically he was. But before the corporate title, before the quiet life he had tried so hard to build, Robin had been a forensic auditor for a federal agency. He hadn't just crunched numbers, he had hunted people. He was the man they sent in when millions went missing, when executives cooked books, and when corrupt officials tried to hide their tracks. He had spent 10 years deconstructing lies, tracing digital fingerprints, and understanding the one fundamental truth of crime. The cover-up is always where the criminal gets caught. He knew exactly what Doris was planning. It was the frame-up, the oldest trick in the amateur handbook. Plant illegal substances or incriminating documents in the target's possession, tip off the authorities, and wait for the system to do the dirty work. It was brutal, efficient, and usually effective against civilians. But Robin wasn't a civilian. He was an expert in the chain of custody. He woke his computer with a keystroke. He didn't open a spreadsheet. Instead, he pulled up a hidden interface bypassing the standard family network. Years of paranoia, or perhaps professional intuition, had led him to install a closed-circuit security system that Doris knew nothing about. She knew about the alarm on the front door, the sensors on the windows. She didn't know about the high-definition pinhole cameras in the garage, the living room, and the hallway, all recording to a cloud server she couldn't access. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He rewound the footage from the living room camera. There it was. He watched himself walk in, freeze, and back out. He watched Doris on the phone. He turned up the audio gain. I'll plant the evidence in his car. He goes to prison. We get the house. Marcos has the packet tonight. Marcos, her tennis instructor, the man who had been smiling at Robin across the net at the club for 6 months. Robin leaned back, steepling his fingers. Most men would be blinded by rage. They would confront the wife, throw a punch at the lover, and end up looking like the violent, unstable aggressor the police would expect to see. That was exactly what Doris wanted. She needed him to be reactive. She needed him to be messy. Instead, Robin felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over him. In the world of forensic investigation, evidence wasn't just about the object found, it was about the timeline of the object. If drugs appeared in his car, that was a problem, but if he had 4K video footage of Marcos putting them there, followed by audio of Doris authorizing it, the drugs ceased to be evidence against Robin. They became a weapon against her. He switched the camera feed to the garage. His pristine sedan sat there gleaming under the lights. It was vulnerable, but it was also a trap. "You want to play the game, Doris?" he whispered to the screen, watching her pour herself a glass of wine in the living room, unaware that her boring husband was currently cataloging her felony conspiracy with time-stamped precision. She thought she was writing the story of his destruction. She didn't realize she had just handed the pen to a master editor. He wouldn't stop them. He wouldn't interrupt the drop. He needed the chain of evidence to be complete. He needed Marcos to touch the car. He needed the trap to snap shut not when the police arrived, but when the handcuffs came out. Robin opened a new file, labeling it simply, Case File D001. He wasn't the husband anymore. He was the auditor, and he was about to conduct the most thorough investigation of his life. The transfer bar on his screen crawled forward with agonizing slowness. 88%, 89. Robin sat motionless in the leather chair of his home office, his eyes fixed on the progress indicator while his ears strained against the silence of the hallway. Outside the heavy oak door, he could hear the click of Doris's heels on the marble foyer, the rhythmic cadence of a woman preparing for a performance. She was humming, a light, airy tune that sounded obscene given what she had just set in motion. He forced himself to breathe. The impulse to run, to grab her by the shoulders and scream "why" was a physical ache in his chest, but he strangled it down. In his old life, emotion was a contaminant. Emotion compromised the scene. Emotion contaminated the chain of custody. If he reacted now, he was just a husband in the middle of a domestic dispute, a he said, she said scenario that a clever lawyer could twist. But if he waited, if he let the data migrate from his local hard drive to the encrypted remote server he kept in Switzerland, he wasn't a husband anymore. He was a prosecutor with a smoking gun. 98%. Complete. Robin closed the laptop, the subtle click sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. He stood up, smoothed the front of his dress shirt, and checked his reflection in the dark monitor. The man staring back looked tired, slightly slumped, harmless. It was the face Doris had grown to despise, the face of a man she thought was too weak to fight back. He adjusted his glasses, forcing his jaw to unclench, and opened the door to walk into the lion's den. Doris was waiting by the entryway, checking her reflection in the gilded mirror. She looked radiant, wearing a sleek black dress that cost more than his first car, a dress bought with the joint account she was planning to empty. When she saw him, her face brightened into that practiced, dazzling smile. "Ready, darling?" she asked, reaching out to straighten his collar. Her fingers brushed his neck, cool and soft. It took every ounce of his discipline not to recoil. "I thought we could go to Le Cuckoo tonight. We haven't been in ages, and I feel like celebrating." "Celebrating?" asked Robin, his voice mild. "What's the occasion?" "Oh, just life," she said breezily, linking her arm through his. "Just us and the future." The drive to the restaurant was a masterclass in dissociation. Robin kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel of the sedan, the very car she planned to turn into a crime scene. He felt a phantom weight in the trunk, the ghost of the evidence she had promised to plant. Beside him, Doris chattered about inconsequential things, the humidity, the neighbor's ugly renovation, her mother's upcoming birthday. Robin nodded at the appropriate intervals, offering the monosyllabic hums of a distracted spouse. "You're quiet tonight," she noted as they pulled up to the valet. "End of quarter audits, just thinking about inventory discrepancies." Doris rolled her eyes, a gesture she didn't bother to hide because she was looking out the window. "Always the inventory. You really need to learn to leave work at the office, Robin. It's so draining." "I suppose you're right," he said, handing the keys to the valet. He watched the young man drive the car away, a sudden spike of anxiety hitting him. Was tonight the night? No, she had said Marcos has the packet. Marcos wasn't here. The timeline was still open. Dinner was a surreal piece of theater. The restaurant was dimly lit and crowded with the city's elite, the air thick with the smell of truffles and expensive wine. They were seated at a corner table, intimate and exposed. Robin ordered a bottle of the Cabernet she liked, playing the role of the dutiful provider. He watched her across the candle flame. She was texting under the table, her eyes darting down to her lap every few seconds. "Is everything okay?" Robin asked, cutting into his steak. "Oh yes, just the charity committee group chat. It's a nightmare," she sighed, slipping the phone face down onto the white tablecloth. Robin knew for a fact the charity committee used email, not text. He took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable, then broke it. "I was thinking about the house today." Doris froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "The house? What about it?" "Just how much work went into it," Robin said, keeping his tone wistful. "I remember laying the deck myself, and the weekends we spent picking out the fixtures. It's a good asset. We're lucky to have it." "We certainly are," she said, her voice tight. She took a large gulp of wine. "But you know, Robin, things are just things. It's the people inside that matter." "Exactly," he agreed, staring straight into her eyes. "Loyalty is everything." She looked away first, feigning interest in a passing waiter. Robin reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Under the table, he opened the Cloud app. The green checkmark confirmed the upload. The audio of her conspiracy, the video of her handoff, the time-stamped metadata. It was all immutable now, replicated across 3 different servers on 2 continents. She could burn the house down. She could smash his computer. She could throw his phone in the river. The truth was already out of her reach. "I'm going to step away for a moment," Robin said, standing up. "Everything all right?" "Fine, just need to check on an email." He walked to the restroom, locked himself in a stall, and exhaled a breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 hours. He wasn't safe yet, not physically, but the leverage had shifted. He washed his hands, scrubbing them as if he could wash off the feeling of her touch on his arm. When he looked in the mirror this time, the harmless corporate manager was gone. The eyes that stared back were cold, assessing, and dangerous. He adjusted his cuffs, checked his watch, and prepared to go back out there. He would pay the bill. He would drive her home. He would sleep in the bed next to her. He would be the perfect husband, right up until the moment he closed the steel trap around her ankle. Saturday morning arrived with a brightness that felt artificial, the sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom in a way that seemed too staged, too perfect. Robin lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds coming from the kitchen. The clinking of porcelain, the hiss of the espresso machine, the soft hum of a woman who usually didn't rise before 10 on weekends. Doris was making breakfast. It was such a cliché of domestic guilt that Robin almost laughed. In his years auditing fraud, he had seen executives buy sudden, lavish gifts for their boards just days before the embezzlement indictment dropped. It was the same principle. The overcorrection of a guilty conscience, or perhaps the final meal before the execution. He threw off the duvet and walked into the kitchen. Doris was standing by the island, wearing a silk robe that slipped off one shoulder. A plate of pancakes sat steaming on the counter, flanked by freshly cut fruit and his favorite dark roast coffee. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she cooed, turning to him with a brightness that bordered on manic. She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "I let you sleep in. You looked so tired last night." Robin rested his chin on the top of her head, staring blankly at the marble backsplash. "Pancakes? We haven't had pancakes in years." "I know," she murmured, squeezing him tighter. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about us, about the house. I feel like we've been drifting apart, Robin, and I hate it. I want to fix it." "Fix it," he repeated, testing the weight of the words. "Yes, in fact," she pulled back, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. It was a look she had perfected, one that used to make him crumble and agree to anything. "I was thinking we should get away, just for the weekend. No work, no phones, just us. We could drive up to the cabin in the Catskills. Leave in an hour?" The Catskills, a 3-hour drive, long stretches of isolated highway, plenty of jurisdiction lines to cross, plenty of places for a state trooper to be waiting for an anonymous tip about a black sedan trafficking narcotics. He took the coffee mug she offered, wrapping his hands around the warmth. "That sounds spontaneous. Are you sure you can get away? What about the committee?" "Forget the committee," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is more important. Please, Robin, it would mean so much to me." He took a sip of the coffee, watching her over the rim. She was vibrating with nervous energy. She needed him in that car. She needed him on the road. "Okay, let's do it. I'll pack a bag." Doris clapped her hands together, a genuine flush of victory rising in her cheeks. "Perfect. Oh, and Robin, let's take your car. Mine is making that awful rattling sound again, and I don't trust it on the highway. Plus, your seats are so much better for a long drive." There it was, the pivot. "My car," he said slowly. "Sure, I just had it detailed, so it's ready to go." "Great, I'll go get dressed." She kissed him on the cheek, a quick, burning peck, and practically skipped out of the room. As soon as she was gone, the warmth drained from Robin's face. He set the mug down and pulled out his phone. He opened the security app and scrolled back to 3:14 a.m. the previous night. The infrared camera in the garage painted the scene in ghostly shades of gray and white. He watched the footage speed by until he saw the garage side door ease open. A figure slipped in. Marcos. He wasn't wearing a mask. Arrogance made them sloppy. Marcos moved to the rear of Robin's sedan. He popped the trunk with a duplicate key, Doris must have given it to him, and lifted the spare tire well. He placed a tightly wrapped, brick-sized package inside, taped it down, and closed the trunk. He was in and out in less than 2 minutes. Robin paused the video on the frame where Marcos placed the package. He zoomed in. It was professional-grade packaging, likely cocaine or fentanyl given the density, enough to trigger a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years, enough to ensure Robin never saw the outside of a cell again. He closed the app. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Doris returned 10 minutes later, dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, carrying a weekend bag. She looks like the picture of the happy, adventurous wife. "Ready?" she chirped. "Just about," Robin said. He grabbed his keys from the bowl. "I'll go warm up the car. You grab your coat." "You're the best," she said, blowing him a kiss. Robin walked out to the garage, the heavy fire door clicking shut behind him. The air was cool and smelled of oil and concrete. He walked around his car, inspecting it with a detached eye of an auditor. No scratches on the trunk lock. Marcos had been careful. He opened the driver's side door and slid in. The leather creaked under his weight. He gripped the steering wheel, looking at the dashboard. This was the vehicle that was supposed to carry him to his doom. Doris and Marcos had scripted this entire morning. The breakfast, the seduction, the trip, the car. They were directing the movie, and they expected him to play his part. He started the engine. The dashboard lit up, the engine purring with a low, powerful rumble. Robin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted USB drive. He plugged it into the car's console, syncing his dashcam footage to the cloud backup one last time. He wasn't just driving a car, he was driving a rolling surveillance unit. When Doris came out a moment later, tossing her bag into the back seat, Robin was waiting with a calm, pleasant expression. She climbed into the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt with a decisive click. "Let's go," she said, a thrill in her voice that had nothing to do with the vacation. "Drive safe, honey." "Don't worry," Robin said, shifting the car into reverse. He backed out of the driveway, the garage door closing slowly like a curtain coming down on the first act. As he turned the car towards the highway, he saw Doris check her phone, her fingers tapping out a quick message. He didn't need to see the screen to know what it said. She was signaling Marcos. The tip would be called in soon. Robin merged onto the main road, his hand steady, his heart cold. She wanted him to drive, so he would drive, but he wasn't taking her to the Catskills. He was taking her to the end of the line. The highway stretched out before them, a gray ribbon cutting through the autumn foliage of upstate New York. But Robin's mind was 3 hours in the past, replaying the events of the early morning with high-definition clarity. To the untrained eye, the crime had been committed by Doris and Marcos, but to a forensic auditor, the architect of the event was the man currently driving the car. It had happened at 3:14 a.m., long before the pancakes and the feigned spontaneity of the weekend getaway. Robin had been awake, sitting in the dark of his home office, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in his glasses. He knew the move was coming. The getaway narrative Doris spun over breakfast was just the cover story. The logistics had to be established first. The motion sensor in the driveway had tripped silently, sending a haptic pulse to the smartwatch on Robin's wrist. On his screen, a figure emerged from the shadows of the hedges. It was Marcos, dressed in a black hoodie that did little to conceal his identity given his distinctive gait and the expensive watch glinting on his wrist. He moved with the jerky, adrenalized paranoia of an amateur, constantly looking over his shoulder at the empty street. Robin watched, his pulse resting at a calm 60 beats per minute. He switched the camera feed to the external garage view. Marcos crept up to the luxury sedan, crouching low. He fished a key fob out of his pocket, the spare Doris had stolen from Robin's valet tray 3 days ago. Marcos pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder, panic starting to animate his movements. He tried the physical key in the door handle, twisting it violently. Still nothing. The car remained a fortress, silent and unyielding. Up in the office, Robin permitted himself a sterile, humorless smile. He had disabled the spare fob's frequency and engaged the deadlock on the physical tumblers hours ago. He didn't want Marcos to have unauthorized access. He wanted Marcos to have granted access. On the screen, Marcos was sweating now. He pulled out his phone, likely to text Doris that the plan was a bust. This was the critical juncture. If Marcos walked away, there was no felony, no trap, no leverage. The conspiracy would remain just talk, and talk wasn't enough to send anyone to federal prison. Robin picked up his phone. He opened the vehicle manufacturer's app, his thumb hovering over the remote unlock icon. He waited until Marcos turned to leave defeated. Click. The sound of the sedan's locks disengaging echoed loudly in the quiet driveway. Marcos froze. He spun back toward the car, eyes wide, looking around to see if he had been spotted. When he saw nothing but darkness, he assumed it was a delay in the fob signal, a stroke of dumb luck. He didn't know he was being ushered in. Robin leaned forward, hitting the record button on the stream. "Come into my parlor," he whispered. Marcos opened the rear driver's side door, then popped the trunk release. He moved to the back of the vehicle, lifting the carpeted floor of the trunk to reveal the spare tire well. From inside his hoodie, he pulled out the package. It was a dense, brick-sized object wrapped in layers of heavy industrial tape. Robin zoomed the camera in. The resolution was crisp enough to see the serial number on the tape roll Marcos likely used, but more importantly, it captured the clear geometry of the package. It wasn't just evidence, it was a narrative. Marcos shoved the brick into the hollow of the spare tire rim, taped it down clumsily to prevent rattling, and slammed the trunk shut. The trap was baited. In that moment, every instinct in Robin's body, the husband instinct, the protector instinct, screamed at him to go downstairs. He could have walked out the front door, phone in hand, and ended it right there. He could have shouted, chased Marcos off, thrown the drugs in the river, and saved his marriage from the final, irrevocable act of war. But the forensic auditor in him overruled the husband. An incomplete investigation was worse than no investigation at all. If he intervened now, it was just trespassing. It was just a marital dispute. By letting the package stay, by allowing the contraband to become a part of the vehicle's inventory, he was shifting the legal framework from attempted to committed. He watched Marcos scurry away into the night. Robin sat back in his chair, the adrenaline finally cooling into a cold, hard resolve. He didn't go downstairs to the garage. He didn't remove the package. To touch it would be to contaminate the chain of custody. If his fingerprints were found on the tape, a defense attorney could argue he put it there himself. No, the package had to remain pristine, an alien object in his world, touched only by the conspirators. He saved the video file, creating 3 redundant backups, one to the cloud, one to a remote server in Zurich, and one to a secure email scheduled to send to his lawyer, Richard O'Brien, in 4 hours. He titled the file, Evidence Item 1, The Payload. Back in the present, the hum of the tires on the asphalt brought him back to reality. Doris was scrolling through her phone next to him, humming along to the radio. She looked relaxed, happy even. She thought the hard part was over. She thought the package in the trunk was a ticking bomb for Robin. She didn't realize that Robin wasn't the bomb's target anymore. He was the detonator. "You okay, honey?" Doris asked, glancing at him. "You're gripping the wheel a little tight." Robin consciously relaxed his hands, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just focused on the road," said softly. "I want to make sure we get there without any interruptions." "Oh, I'm sure it'll be a smooth trip," Doris said, turning back to her window, hiding the small, cruel smirk that tugged at the corner of her mouth. Robin glanced at the rearview mirror, not looking at the traffic behind him, but imagining the spare tire well beneath the trunk floor. The evidence was right where he wanted it, and in a few miles, when the lights flashed red and blue, he wouldn't be the one trembling. He would be the one waiting for the documentation to begin. The timeline of a perfect crime relies on the assumption that the victim is static, a piece on the board that moves only when pushed. Doris believed she was the Grand Master, moving Robin toward his inevitable checkmate. She didn't realize that while she was dreaming of spending his money, Robin had already left the board entirely to rewrite the rules of the game. It had been 5:30 a.m. when Robin slipped out of bed. The house was silent, the air still thick with sleep. He left a note on the nightstand, gone for a run, back for coffee, and took the service elevator down to the basement garage. He didn't take the sedan. That was the crime scene now, a sealed environment he wouldn't disturb until the finale. Instead, he took his old beat-up gym bag and walked 4 blocks to the all-night diner on 4th and Main, where a black town car was idling in the gray pre-dawn mist. The back door opened before he even reached the handle. Inside sat Richard O'Brien, a man whose tailored suits cost more than most people's annual rent and whose shark-like grin was usually reserved for crushing district attorneys. Next to him sat a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his belt, Detective Vance, a contact from Robin's days in federal auditing. "You look like hell, Robin," Richard said by way of greeting, sliding over on the leather seat to make room. "I assume the package has been delivered?" 3:14 a.m., Robin said, his voice devoid of fatigue. "Spare tire well. Marcos did the drop. Doris authorized it. I have audio confirmation of the conspiracy and 4K video of the act." He reached into his pocket and produced a matte black flash drive. He didn't hand it over immediately. He held it up, catching the dim light of the street lamp outside. "This is the primary. Metadata is locked. Chain of custody starts now." Detective Vance leaned forward, taking the drive with a gloved hand. He slotted it into a ruggedized laptop resting on his knees. If this is what you say it is, Robin, we're not looking at simple possession. We're looking at conspiracy to commit a felony, filing a false police report, and evidence tampering. Federal charges. It's all there, Robin said. I let them plant it. I needed the actus reus to match the mens rea. Vance watched the footage in silence, the blue light flickering across his face. He whistled low when he saw the clear shot of Marcos's face illuminated by the trunk light. Sloppy, he didn't even wear gloves? He wore gloves, Robin corrected, but he touched the fender with his forearm. You'll get DNA transfer there. And he licked the tape before he tore it. Richard chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Amateurs. They think real life is CSI, but they forget the basics. He turned to Robin, his expression hardening. Here's the situation. We can arrest them now based on this. Pick up Marcos at his apartment, grab Doris when she wakes up. Easy win. No, Robin said, cutting him off. That's a domestic dispute. Doris will claim she didn't know, that Marcos acted alone. Marcos will lawyer up and stay silent. She gets the house, I get a messy divorce, and she walks away with a slap on the wrist. So what's the play? Vance asked, closing the laptop. The play is the traffic stop, Robin said, his eyes cold. She's planning to have me drive the car to the Catskills this morning. She'll trigger an anonymous tip once we cross state lines. She wants the humiliation. She wants the mugshot. She wants me in handcuffs on the side of the road so she can play the grieving, shocked wife for the cameras. Risky, Richard mused, tapping his chin. If a random trooper pulls you over and finds a brick of fentanyl, things can go sideways fast. You could get shot, Robin, or booked into General Pop before we can bail you out. That's why I called you, Robin said. I don't want a random trooper. I want your team. Vance nodded slowly, understanding the architecture of the trap. You want a controlled intercept. We flag the vehicle in the system. When the anonymous tip comes in, and it will, we route it to my unit. We pull you over. We do the dance. Exactly. I want her to see the lights. I want her to feel the victory. I want her to be standing on the roadside, watching the officer open the trunk, thinking she's won. I need her to confirm the existence of the drugs to the officer before you reveal you know who put them there. Classified entrapment? Richard asked, playing devil's advocate. Not if she initiates the call, Vance countered. She sets the timeline. We're just responding with enhanced situational awareness. Richard pulled a document from his briefcase. I've drafted a preemptive affidavit. It states that you are aware of the contraband, that you did not place it there, and that you are cooperating with law enforcement to apprehend the actual perpetrators. Sign this and you're bulletproof. Legally, you're an informant, not a suspect. Robin signed the paper without hesitation. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the car. One more thing, Robin said, handing the pen back. When you stop us, be aggressive. Treat me like a criminal. Scare her. If she thinks I'm going down, she might say something incriminatory in the moment. She gets chatty when she thinks she's winning. Vance smirked. I can do aggressive. We'll be waiting at mile marker 86. It's a dead zone for cell service, so she won't be able to call Marcos to warn him when things go south. Perfect, Robin said. He checked his watch. I have to get back. She's making pancakes. Richard shook his head, a mix of horror and admiration on his face. You're a cold son of a bitch, Robin. You're gonna sit there and eat breakfast with the woman trying to frame you? It's not breakfast, Richard, Robin said, opening the door and stepping back out into the misty morning. It's the last meal of the condemned. She just doesn't know it's hers. He walked back to the apartment, his stride measured and calm. He had the law in his pocket and a script in his head. The legal trap was set. Now all he had to do was drive the getaway car. The silence in the luxury sedan was broken only by the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of tires on pavement and the relentless soft clicking of Doris's manicured thumbs against her smartphone screen. To the casual observer, she looked like a bored passenger passing the time on a long drive. To Robin, who is currently watching the data packets sync to his encrypted cloud server via the vehicle's Wi-Fi hotspot, she looked like a woman signing her own confession. They were an hour outside the city, cruising through the dense greenery of the state parkways. The reception here was spotty for cellular data, which was why Doris had eagerly connected to the car's internal network the moment they pulled out of the driveway. She didn't realize that the Robin's car network was actually a filtered gateway, logging every keystroke and metadata tag directly to the case file Robin had named D-001. "Who are you texting so furiously?" Robin asked, his voice mild, eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. "Work again?" Doris jumped slightly, a reflex she quickly masked with a scoff. "God, no. I told you, I'm done with the committee for the weekend. I was just looking at Pinterest, ideas for the sunroom. It's so dreary in there." "Dreary," Robin repeated. "I thought you liked the mahogany paneling. We spent 3 weekends sanding it down by hand." "It's too dark, Robin," she sighed, angling the phone screen away from him. "It feels like a dungeon. I want something open, white, minimalist, something that breathes." She wasn't looking at Pinterest. On the virtual mirror running in the background of Robin's smartwatch, the text log scrolled in real time. "Doris, he's listening to a podcast, totally zoned out. We just passed the reservoir." "Marcos, perfect. I'm making the call in 5. Did you check the bag?" "Doris, I don't need to. He's driving the hearse. Just make sure you sound panicked when you call the tip line. Erratic driving, remember?" "Marcos, don't worry, babe. By tonight, you're the grieving wife and I'm the supportive friend." "Doris, and then we get the house. I'm already looking at contractors to gut his office. I hate that room." Robin tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening for a fraction of a second before he forced them to relax. That office was where he kept the photos of his parents. It was where he had built his life after leaving the agency. She wasn't just planning to send him to prison. She was planning to erase his existence before the cell door even slammed shut. She wanted to strip the house down to the studs and rebuild it as a monument to her own greed. "White sounds expensive," Robin said, testing the waters. "Oh, don't be such a penny pincher," Doris laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "We have the savings. And honestly, Robin, isn't it time we enjoyed our money? You just let it sit there. It's depressing." She typed another message as she spoke. "Doris, he's complaining about money again. God, I can't wait until I have control of the accounts. I'm going to burn that ugly leather chair of his in the backyard." Robin watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting in the tall grass of the median. He felt a strange kinship with the bird. He wasn't the prey anymore. "Maybe you're right," Robin said, softly. "Maybe it is time for a change, a complete renovation." Doris smirked, interpreting his resignation as defeat. She finally minimized the chat window and actually did open an interior design app, swiping through images of Italian marble floors and gold leaf fixtures. She was mentally spending his life insurance, his 401k, and the equity of the home he had paid for. She was drunk on the proximity of victory. In her mind, the plan was flawless. The police stop the car, they find the drugs, Robin is arrested for trafficking, and she plays the victim who had no idea her husband was a criminal mastermind. With Robin in federal prison, she gets power of attorney. She gets everything. She didn't notice that Robin was driving precisely 2 miles per hour under the speed limit. He didn't notice that he was checking his mirrors every 30 seconds, not for traffic, but for the specific black SUV that had been trailing them at a discreet distance for the last 10 miles. "Marcos, call made. They're dispatching. Showtime." The text flashed across the hidden log. Doris set her phone down in the cup holder, a satisfied sigh escaping her lips. She rolled her shoulders back, adjusting her posture. She was getting into character, the worried wife, the innocent bystander. "Robin," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of faux concern. "Are you sure you're okay to drive? You seem swervy." "Swervy?" asked Robin, maintaining his lane with laser precision. "Yeah, just drifting a bit. Maybe you should pull over. Let me drive." It was the final setup. If he pulled over now, on her command, the police would find them stationary, a much safer scenario for her. Or perhaps she wanted her fingerprints on the wheel to prove she was trying to save them from his erotic behavior. "I'm fine, Doris," Robin said, his voice hardening. "Actually, I've never been more focused in my life." He saw it then, the glint of sunlight on chrome in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was closing the gap. Far behind it, the distinct red and blue strobe of a state police cruiser crested the hill. But it wasn't just a cruiser, it was an unmarked tactical unit, flanked by 2 highway patrol vehicles. Doris turned in her seat, seeing the lights. Her eyes lit up with a terrifying mixture of fear and excitement. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his jacket. "Robin! Oh my God, Robin, pull over! The police!" She screamed it, rehearsing her lines for an audience that wasn't there yet. "What did you do? Why are they chasing us?" Robin didn't look at her. He didn't look at the phone where Marcos was sending a celebratory boom emoji. He looked straight ahead at mile marker 86, watching the trap snap shut. "I didn't do anything, Doris," he said, tapping the brakes slowly, guiding the car towards the gravel shoulder exactly where Detective Vance's team was waiting. As the car crunched to a halt and the sirens drowned out her fake sobbing, Robin felt a profound sense of peace. She thought she was remodeling the house. She was about to find out that the only new room she'd be seeing was 6 by 8 and made of concrete. The red and blue lights fractured the gray afternoon, bouncing off the wet asphalt and blinding them both. Robin killed the engine. Beside him, Doris was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She hyperventilated, clutching her chest, tears already streaming down her face before the officer even tapped on the glass. "Driver, hands on the wheel!" the amplified voice boomed. Robin complied, his face a mask of terrified confusion, the exact expression a guilty man tries to hide or an innocent man wears when his world collapses. But his pulse was steady. He knew the script. "Get out of the vehicle, now! Separate them!" The next 10 minutes were a blur of shouted commands and rough handling. Robin was shoved against the hood of the car, patted down and cuffed. He saw Doris being led away by a female officer who wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, treating her like the traumatized survivor of a reckless criminal. Doris shot a look back at Robin, a look of mock horror that barely concealed the gleam of absolute triumph in her eyes. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," but Robin knew she was singing inside. They were transported separately. Robin was placed in the back of a cruiser, while Doris was escorted into an unmarked SUV, the Mobile Command Unit. She sat on the plush leather seat, accepting a bottle of water, her mind racing with the thrill of victory. She had done it. Robin was in cuffs. The drugs were in the car. The house was hers. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the precinct. Robin was taken to holding, or so she assumed. Doris was led to interview room B, the soft room with comfortable chairs and a coffee maker reserved for victims and cooperative witnesses. She sat at the metal table, composing herself, wiping away the mascara streaks to look appropriately devastated. When the door opened, she expected a sympathetic beat cop to take her statement. Instead, a man in a sharp gray suit walked in, followed by the heavy-set detective from the roadside. The man in the suit, Richard O'Brien, didn't look like a cop. He looked like a shark in Italian wool. "Mrs. Montgomery," Detective Vance said, pulling out a chair. "I'm Detective Vance, narcotics. This is Mr. O'Brien, a consultant for the district attorney's office. We have a few questions about the vehicle." Doris nodded, sniffing loudly. "Of course, I still can't believe it. Robin has been acting so strange lately, secretive. But drugs? I had no idea. You have to believe me." "We believe you have a story to tell," Vance said, his voice flat. "We found a substantial amount of fentanyl in the spare tire well, street value over $50,000. That's a federal trafficking charge, minimum 20 years. Doris covered her mouth, feigning a gasp. "Oh, poor Robin, he's destroyed his life." "Someone certainly has," Richard said, speaking for the first time. He placed a laptop on the table, opening it with a deliberate slowness. "We received an anonymous tip about the car, very specific, mentioned the make, model, plate, and the exact location of the contraband. We traced the call." Doris's heart skipped a beat. "Well, thank God for good Samaritans, I suppose." It wasn't a Samaritan. It was a burner phone, purchased at a bodega on 5th and Elm 3 days ago by a man named Marcos Ruiz. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Doris froze, the bottle water crinkling loudly in her grip. "Marcos? I know a Marcos, my tennis instructor. But why would he—" "We picked up Mr. Ruiz 20 minutes ago," Vance lied effortlessly. "He was very eager to cut a deal. He mentioned something about a hostile takeover of assets, the house, the accounts." "That's ridiculous," Doris snapped, her voice rising. The panic was real now. "Marcos is just a
an employee. If he's saying I was involved, he's lying. It's his word against mine. I'm the wife. I'm the victim here. It's not his word against yours, Richard said, tapping a key on the laptop. It's yours against yours. The screen flared to life. Doris stared. It wasn't the footage of the traffic stop, it was a split-screen video. On the left was a high-definition night vision shot of Marcos opening the trunk of Robin's car and taping the package inside. On the right was the interior dashcam footage from the drive this morning. Doris's voice filled the small room, tinny but unmistakable. He goes to prison, we get the house. Marcos has the packet, tonight. Then the video cut to the text log scrolling in real time, synced with her face in the car. Doris, I'm going to burn that ugly leather chair of his. He's driving the hearse. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Doris stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The grieving wife mask cracked and fell away, leaving only the terrified, exposed face of a criminal caught in the glare of undeniable truth. This is illegal, she whispered, grasping at straws. You can't record me. I didn't consent. Actually, Richard said with a predatory smile, the vehicle is registered to Robbins LLC. You signed a usage agreement 3 years ago that consents to audio and video monitoring for insurance purposes. It was in the fine print of the lease documents you didn't bother to read. Vance leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The sympathy was gone. Doris Montgomery, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal narcotics trafficking, filing a false police report, and attempted entrapment. We also have warrants for your financial records, which I'm sure will show the transfers to Ruiz. Doris looked at the door as if expecting Robin to walk in and fix it, to be the soft pushover husband one last time. Where is he? She choked out. Where is Robin? Robin is in the observation room, Vance said, nodding towards the mirrored glass. He's pressing charges, and he's keeping the house. Doris turned to the mirror. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him. The man she had laughed at, the man she had planned to bury, was watching her drown. She slumped back in the chair, the fight draining out of her, as Vance unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked, a cold, final sound that echoed the closing of a cell door. Stand up, Mrs. Montgomery. The show is over.
Marcos Ruiz sought in interview room C, a space that was noticeably less accommodating than the one Doris occupied. There was no carpet, no coffee maker, and the chair was bolted to the floor. The air conditioning was cranked up high, a standard tactic to keep suspects shivering and on edge, but Marcos was sweating through his fitted designer t-shirt regardless. He had spent the last hour convincing himself that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Doris would fix it. She had the money, the lawyers, the connections. She was the one who played chess. He was just, well, he wasn't sure what he was anymore, other than terrified. The door buzzed and swung open. Detective Vance walked in carrying a thick file, followed by the man in the gray suit, Richard O'Brien. They didn't shout. They didn't slam the table. They moved with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of men who already knew the end of the story. Mr. Ruiz, Richard said, sitting opposite him and placing a single sheet of paper on the table. You have a very expensive watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, if I'm not mistaken. Retail value roughly $60,000. Marcos blinked, thrown off balance. What? Yeah, it was a gift. From Doris Montgomery, Richard noted, glancing at a document in the file. Paid for from a joint account she shares with her husband. Technically, that watch belongs to the man you helped frame for a felony. I didn't frame anyone, Marcos stammered, crossing his arms. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a tennis coach. Vance sighed, a sound of profound boredom. He opened the laptop again, spinning it around. Marcos, we have you on 4K video planting fentanyl in the spare tire well of a 2024 Mercedes sedan. We have you on the audio feed discussing the packet with Mrs. Montgomery. We have the text logs from this morning where you confirm making the anonymous tip. Vance pressed a key. The video played. Marcos watched himself in the garage, the infrared camera capturing every damning pixel of his face. He watched himself lick the tape. He watched himself smirk as he closed the trunk.
The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. The arrogance that had defined him, the swagger of the younger lover, the man who thought he was stealing a king's castle, evaporated instantly, leaving behind a frightened child. That's not— It is, Richard interrupted softly. And here is the reality, Marcos. We are charging you with conspiracy to distribute, possession with intent, and evidence tampering. Because of the quantity of the drugs, federal sentencing guidelines suggest a mandatory minimum of 15 years. You're 26 years old. You'll be 41 when you get out. Best case scenario. Marcos made a small choking sound. However, Richard continued, leaning in, my client, Mr. Montgomery, is a reasonable man. He understands the dynamics here. He knows you were influenced, seduced, perhaps, by an older woman with a lot of money and a very dark plan. Marcos looked up, his eyes wet and wide. He saw the lifeline. Doris, Marcos whispered. Doris is the target, Vance confirmed. She's the architect. You're just the contractor. But right now, you're both facing the same time, unless one of you decides to clarify the hierarchy. Richard topped the table with his pen. The prisoner's dilemma, Marcos. First one to talk gets the deal. Second one gets the maximum sentence. Doris is in the other room right now. She's smart, she's manipulative, and she has a lot more to lose than you. Do you think she's protecting you, or do you think she's telling us right now that you forced her into this, that you're a drug dealer who threatened her? It was a lie. Doris hadn't said anything yet, but it was a lie that struck the exact frequency of Marcos's insecurity. He knew their relationship wasn't built on love. It was built on greed and lust, and if the money's gone— It was her idea, Marcos blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. I swear to God, it was all her. She came to me 3 months ago. She said she hated him. She said he was boring, that he was holding her back. She wanted the house, the portfolio. She told me if we got rid of him, we could live like kings. Go on, Vance said, flipping open a notepad. She paid for the drugs, Marcos said, his voice gaining strength as he threw her under the bus. She gave me $5,000 in cash to buy the brick from a guy in Jersey. I didn't want to do it. She pushed me. She said it was the only way. She gave me the key to the car. She told me exactly when to plant it. She scripted the text messages. I was just doing what she said. Will you testify to that? In open court, with her sitting right there. I'll testify to anything, Marcos said, shivering. Just don't send me to prison for 20 years, please. Down the hall, inside interview room B, Doris was pacing. She had demanded a lawyer, demanded her phone, demanded to speak to the chief of police. She was still trying to play the indignant socialite, convinced that her status would shield her from the consequences of her actions. The door opened. She spun around, expecting her attorney. Instead, Richard O'Brien stood there, looking at her with a mixture of pity and distaste. Where is my lawyer? Doris snapped. He's being processed at the front desk, but I thought you should know the update on your co-conspirator. Marcos? Doris straightened her spine. Marcos won't say anything. He loves me. We're in this together. In this together? Richard repeated, tasting the irony. That's a lovely sentiment, Mrs. Montgomery. Unfortunately, Mr. Ruiz didn't share it. He just signed a full confession. He identified you as the mastermind, the financier, and the sole beneficiary of the plot. He gave us the name of the dealer you paid for, and he admitted that the entire weekend getaway was your orchestration. Doris froze. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. No, you're lying. Marcos wouldn't do that. We were going to get the house, Richard finished. He traded you for a reduced sentence, Doris. It took him less than 5 minutes. He didn't even hesitate. Richard stepped aside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the reinforced glass of the hallway, Doris could see 2 officers escorting Marcos toward the booking area. He didn't look back. He didn't search for her. He was weeping, talking animatedly to his lawyer, desperate to save his own skin. The realization hit Doris like a physical blow. There was no grand romance. There was no ride-or-die partnership. She had destroyed her marriage, her reputation, and her freedom for a man who sold her out the moment the heat got turned up. She sank back into the metal chair, the silence of the room amplifying the roaring in her ears. She thought of Robin. Robin, who had built the deck with his own hands. Robin, who had stood by her for 10 years. Robin, who is currently free, while she sat in a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and despair. "He's gone, Doris," Richard said, his voice devoid of sympathy as he turned to leave. "And frankly, he never really was there. You're all alone now." The door clicked shut, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. Doris stared at the blank gray wall, the image of the house she would never see again burning in her mind, realizing too late that the only person who had ever truly loved her was the man she had tried to destroy.
The gavel didn't sound like a thunderclap, as movies often portrayed it. It was a sharp wooden crack, quick and final, like the snapping of a bone. "The defendant is sentenced to 144 months in a federal correctional facility," the judge intoned, looking over his spectacles at the woman standing before him. Doris didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply shrank. In the harsh fluorescent light of the courtroom, stripped of her designer wardrobe, her jewelry, and her delusions, she looked incredibly small. The prison-issue gray suit hung loosely on her frame, a stark contrast to the bright yellow blazer she had worn the day she signed her own warrant. She turned slightly, scanning the gallery, perhaps looking for Marcos, but he was long gone, already serving his reduced sentence in a minimum security camp upstate. Her eyes found Robin instead. He sat in the back row, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she looked at him with a flicker of the old entitlement, a silent plea for him to fix this, to make the bad thing go away. But Robin didn't move, he didn't smile, and he didn't look away. He simply watched her with the detached, clinical interest of an auditor witnessing a bankruptcy. The assets had been liquidated, the liabilities had been discharged, the account was closed. When the marshals led her away, the heavy side door swallowing her whole, Robin stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. He didn't go back to the office. He drove, not the sedan, but a rental, straight to the dealership on the edge of town. The Mercedes, released from impound 3 days prior, was already there, gleaming under the showroom lights. It was a beautiful machine, engineered for performance and comfort. It was also a crime scene. To Robin, the leather still smelled of Marcus's sweat and Doris's betrayal. "You're sure you want to sell it?" the dealer asked, running a hand along the pristine fender. "It's practically brand new. You'll take a hit on the depreciation." "I don't care about the depreciation," Robin said, handing over the spare key, the one Marcos had failed to use. "I just want it off the books. Liquidate it." He signed the papers without looking at the final sum. Money was a tool, and in this case, the loss was a necessary expense for sanitation. As he walked away, watching the porter drive the car toward the back lot, he felt a physical weight lift from his shoulders. The vessel of the trap was gone. The house was quiet when he arrived. For the last 10 years, silence in this house had been a heavy thing, loaded with unspoken resentments and the tension of walking on eggshells. It was the silence of a husband trying not to annoy a wife who had grown to despise him. But as Robin unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer, the silence that greeted him was different. It was expansive, clean. It was the silence of a library after closing time. He walked through the room slowly, reclaiming the space. He went into the kitchen where the espresso machine sat cold and unused. He opened the refrigerator and threw out the specialized almond milk Doris drank, the expensive probiotic yogurts, the kale she bought and never ate. He watched the bin fill up with the remnants of her routine. He walked into the living room. The evening sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He stopped in front of the mahogany paneling, the dark wood Doris had called a dungeon, the wood she had planned to rip out and replace with soulless white minimalism. It glowed with a warm, rich amber hue. It was sturdy. It was real. He went to his home office. The door was open. The room was exactly as he had left it, the sanctuary of his mind. He walked over to the leather chair, the ugly chair she had promised to burn in the backyard. He ran his hand over the worn armrest, feeling the grain of the leather. It was comfortable, broken in by years of hard work and late nights. It was his. He sat down, the chair groaning familiarly under his weight. He booted up his computer one last time. The folder labeled Case File D001 sat on the desktop. It contained gigabytes of data,
Video files, audio logs, text transcripts, legal affidavits. It was the documentation of the worst month of his life. Robin right-clicked the folder. He hovered over delete. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the old instincts of the investigator warring with the man who just wanted to move on. But the investigation was over. The judgment had been rendered. Keeping the evidence now was just hoarding pain. He clicked delete. Then he emptied the trash. The screen blinked, the icon vanishing into the digital void. Robin leaned back, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been held for a decade. He wasn't lonely. He didn't feel the pang of the empty house or the absence of a partner. He felt the profound, vibrating satisfaction of balance. The chaos had been ordered. The threat had been neutralized. The ledger was zeroed out. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline as the lights began to flicker in the twilight. Somewhere out there, in a cold concrete cell, Doris was just beginning to understand the math of consequences. But here, in the house he had built, in the life he had defended, there was only peace. Robin smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. He turned away from the window and went to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of wine. He had a book to read, and for the rest of his life, he could read it in absolute, glorious silence.